早晨，各位，2014
Good morning, everyone. The Marriage Amendment Bill 2014 is now calling its second meeting to order, and we are here to meet with deputations and the administration this morning. And as said, the deadline of the invitation to express views to us, we have received a total of 105 deputations submissions indicating that they'd like to come and verbally express their views to the Bills Committee. And also, as at the deadline on the 15th of April, we received a total of 2,454 written submissions from groups and individuals who are not going to attend today's meeting. That's the deadline for submission of views. And the Law Society also indicated that in mid-May it's going to submit its views to us. And indeed, during the interim, we have been receiving a lot of submissions from different groups and deputations. And today's meeting will have 68 deputations and individuals coming to meet with us. And we have already scheduled another meeting at 9 o'clock on the 29th of April to meet with the remaining 33 deputations to listen to their views. As we won't be able to meet with all the 101 deputations and individuals within the same morning, that's why we have to schedule another meeting to meet with the rest of them. At the last meeting, the deputy chairman said that he'd like to invite the IWG, the Interdepartmental Working Group, to meet with members of the Bills Committee, and the IWG's chairman is the Secretary for Justice. I have contacted the administration on this, and verbally they have promised that they would be prepared to accept this invitation so that we can find a time slot when we can meet with the group. And then we can sit down and talk about this. And as to the date and time, that will be sorted out with the administration. Yes, Ms. Sito. Chairman, with regard to SRS, I think the community indeed has very little understanding about this because, well, earlier on when I talked to some friends, I found out that number one, they dare not talk about this with people, the fact that they do not know much about this. So when we invite the IWG, can we also invite the hospital authorities, doctors who have been doing such surgeries to explain to us the procedures involved, the risks, and also the treatment and so on involved in a full SRS? Because if there are voices suggesting that all the applicants will have to complete the entire procedure, in fact, it could be rather difficult and risky for certain individuals. So let's invite them to talk to us about this. Yes, today's meeting will be divided into 3 sessions, and each will be lasting for about 80 minutes. The first one from 9 o'clock to 10:20, and 23 groups and individuals will be attending. And then the second session will be from 10:25 to 11:45. Another 23 groups and individuals will be coming. And then the third session will be from 11:50 to 1:10. And again, some 22 groups and individuals will be attending. In the process, before the end of the last session, I'll be inviting the administration to give us an overall response, and there can also be a discussion between the administration and members. And between the first and second session, there will be about 15 minutes for members to put their questions to the deputations. So mainly, that will be for members putting questions to deputations for them to clarify certain points, or for members to gauge a better understanding of their views, because we do have quite a sizable group with us today. That's why we have to control the time more efficiently. All right. I'll invite the Secretary to invite the deputations and individuals to come and join us. For the deputations and individuals attending today's meeting, each of them will be given 3 minutes to speak. And then I'll stop them after 3 minutes, and the next one will be invited to speak. I'm sure you all know the rules and the arrangements. I'd also like to invite the administration team to join us. With us today from the administration are Mr. John Lee, Undersecretary for Security, Mr. Billy Wu, Principal Assistant Secretary for Security, and Mr. David Chu, Assistant Director, Personal Documentation from the Immigration Department. All right. Welcome to you all. Good morning. I'd like to remind the attendees today that in front of you, you have the earpiece. You can use it. And there is also a microphone in front of you. And for the channels, 0 is the floor, 1 is Cantonese, 2 is English, and 3 is Putonghua or Mandarin. And I'd also like to remind all of you here that your remarks at the meeting will not be covered by the Electoral Powers and Privileges Ordinance, i.e., your remarks will not be protected by that ordinance, and your written submissions would also not be covered and protected by that ordinance, that is Cap 382. I'd also like to remind the deputations and the individuals here that is for people attending meetings in this complex. There are security measures for those in the public gallery and for those in the meeting room. And if those in the public gallery would like to get such notifications, they can also do so by making inquiries with the Secretariat. We will now start with the deputations' views, and each of you will have 3 minutes. First, Ms. May Ho. Good morning, Chairman. I'm from the Hong Kong Youth Alliance. Well, as the mother of 2, with regard to the proposal by the administration to amend the marriage ordinance, that's because of the ruling by the CFA, and both my alliance and myself respect that, and we welcome that because in doing so we'll be able to define what's meant by a female. But then at the same time, we cannot just do it overnight. We do expect that the administration will spend more time to collect more data and information, and will have to spend a bit more time to define what's to be done about the legislation. Is it really necessary, or should we adopt a better definition in order to suit Hong Kong's circumstances? With regard to people who say that an SRS might be risky, and that's why we should not make it a prerequisite for people to change their gender, and instead we should look at their psychological condition, I think that would cause confusion. Well, once this message was out, I also talked to my children, and my children also passed this information or message to me. Well, they say that it's discrimination because, all right, if my ID card can be changed to male, it's also my identity. So when such circumstances arise, I'd like to point out that, during adolescence, many young people might be very curious about the relationship between the two sexes, and it's a very critical time when we have to make sure that they would not go astray. And if somebody's identity depends on his figure and whether or not he or she has gone through this SRS, and then he'll change his gender, and then the ID card would also change accordingly. Then we believe that that's normal, that's acceptable. And then in the community, that might also send out a very wrong message. That is, for a boy, well, it could be from either sex, and if he or she feels psychologically that he should be from an opposite sex, then if we just take it to mean that he or she is entitled to become that gender, then if that's allowed, then young people will become very liberal in terms of their gender, and they might just change sex very casually, and that would also cause a lot of confusion. We will no longer be able to teach or tell our next generation as to whether or not somebody is from a particular gender. So for the purpose of our younger generation, we have to do something good for them, and we also hope that the future of our young generation will be clear, and they'll be able to have a proper view about this. Next, Mr. Yao Mei Guang, core member of Justice Alliance. Well, I'm representing the ordinary public. I'd also like to say or make a few points to those who are concerned about transsexual marriage. I hope that the community will understand this. Number one, for us Hong Kongers, we agree that for people who have gone through a full SRS, it's not just about their innate feelings, but then externally, if they've already become somebody of another sex, then that would be acceptable, and therefore they should be allowed to change gender, and they should be allowed to be married to someone from the opposite sex. And somebody also says that the risk of such a surgery would be very high, and it's also very dangerous or risky. And the cost would be very high, and as a result, for people to go through this SRS, they will be forced to be sterilized, and that's very inhumane. And also, in giving birth, is also very dangerous, it's also very costly. So, is it really inhumane? Well, what about plastic surgery? It's also very risky, and the cost is also very high. Would you call that inhumane? And if you want to give birth, and if you want to go through plastic surgery, well, it's a price that you will have to pay. So why on earth that if you want to become a person from another gender, you would not be required to pay a price? And why would you say that it's inhumane to require you to go through that procedure? And also for a male having gone through an SRS and become a woman, of course, he will have to be sterilized. You cannot expect someone who is still a male and then he is sterilized. All right, if somebody who has not gone through an SRS, and just because psychologically he feels like a woman, and then if he's allowed to change his ID card's gender and become a woman, and if he can still maintain his identity as a man and give birth, then what does that mean? For a woman, if she can still be pregnant, and if she still calls herself a man, then what does that mean? Fifth, if a person who is a man who has not really gone through a full SRS, just because he feels like a woman, and then he's allowed to get an ID card and then change the gender on his ID card and become a woman. And then what about the changing room and toilets in Hong Kong and also in public places? How should we treat him? Should he be treated as a woman or a man? That would cause a lot of confusion. Next, Mr. Albert Low, Chairman, and good morning, everyone. I'm speaking as a parent. I have been very fortunate in the sense that I grew up from a traditional family, and my father really aspires of Western culture. That's why from a very young age we have been able to enjoy a lot of freedoms and liberty, but then we've been taught that there is always a bottom line for everything. It's like freedom. You cannot expect that we can abuse our freedom, but then the bottom line is that we should not cause any disturbance or nuisance to others. So coming back to this issue, the marriage ordinance, I believe that for a healthy family, the children would be, well, that would be very important to the children, because let's say, taking myself as an example, I grew up from a traditional family and all my family members are normal people, and we do enjoy that lifestyle. But then if the marriage ordinance is to be amended so that men can be married to a man or a female can be married to a female, and then for people who have not really changed their biological features, and then if they can become another gender so long as they wish to, then in this community, at least for myself, I would find that unacceptable. And then for the father in a family, well, to a child, he's a role model, he's a male, and then for a mother in the family, she will also be able to love her children as a mom, and there is no replacement at all. And I'm sure all of you would find that readily understandable. And also with regard to the case of W, if indeed, well, he feels himself to be someone of a particular gender, and he has gone through certain procedures and operations to change his figure and become someone of another sex, and if he aspires for marriage, then I would respect that, because it's his personal decision and it has nothing to do with other people. But then there are some academics and scholars who are asking that, well, if somebody feels like a particular person or somebody from a different gender, then he should be allowed to change his or her gender, then I would find that difficult to accept, because that would also affect the social values. For example, if I feel like a woman, then would you agree that I can go into a female toilet? I don't think that's acceptable. Also, for heterosexual marriage, of course, that's not a problem. But then for same-sex marriage, I think that would be very controversial. That's why I would strongly urge members to support freedom and liberty. But then, despite all that, there has to be a bottom line. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Low. Next, Ms. Letitia Lee. Well, the EOC chairman, Dr. Yok Chow, suggests that the administration should set up this gender recognition ordinance so that for transsexuals there should be no requirement for them to complete the full SRS before they can get married with someone of the same sex, because it's a forced and coerced sterilization, and it's against the Human Rights Convention, and the whole procedure is very risky and it's very costly.
60% of transgender people are not willing to accept surgery, and he feels that they can use administrative means to help transgender people marry legally. For example, according to the Immigration Administrative Guidelines, those who have completed a full sexual reassignment surgery can change sex identity and can marry. In 2004, the UK had a Sex Recognition Act allowing transgender people without surgery, as long as they have been observed by medical and legal experts, they can change the gender. So we think that Mr. Chow is taking the case of W to amend the marriage bill, and he's allowing homosexual sexual marriage. And Mr. Chow's era is coercing them to be sterile. So if a man changes his sex to a female, if he retains his male sexual function, he's still a man or woman. So, and in the UK in 2004, they had a Sexual Recognition Act. It's only applicable to UK. Hong Kong law is only applicable to Hong Kong. We cannot have other jurisdictions having this law, then Hong Kong need to refer to that. So we have two different cultures. We cannot mix the two. If you just rely on the law, if you just rely on medical expert observation, that is not reliable. With no surgery, they cannot change gender. Mr. Yok Chow is siding with homosexuals. And on last year, his behavior last year is siding with the gay people. Mr. Yok Chow's sexual orientation discrimination ordinance will allow the homosexuals to have special privileges. It's something we're against. The homosexual will enjoy rights, freedom of expression, freedom of association, but for us who oppose, we will become second-class citizens. Is that correct? Thank you, Chairman. The public in attendance, please refrain from making comments or applauding. This will affect the proceedings. This is my first reminder. Next. Mr. Tan Dak-ji of People Power. I'm speaking on behalf of People Power. I agree with that gentleman. It's not relevant to today's discussion. If you feel that you're a woman and you want to enter the women's washroom, I think a person's assessment, transgender assessment, relies on experts, and it takes a long time. It just doesn't mean that if I feel like a woman, I go to the washroom with Letitia Lee. So legislation and homophobic comments will be oppressed. I have to point these out. Just now, in the Mr. Wang Jifeng parent said one woman, one wife is the best. I have never seen these people before. You are just using these children as tools. It is just a tool of fear. So I'm talking about liberation from fear. So those who are against, those who are discriminating against transgender, please liberate yourselves from fear. The quarterfinal appeal says that the government should refer to the 2004 UK Sex Recognition Act. Hong Kong does not have legal powers to deal with this. And the government thinks that by amending the MAB they can resolve the issue. Have you considered the ruling of the Court of Final Appeal? It states very clearly the courts do not require those who have completed sexual reassignment surgery to be married. We should stop to think. Christians want to have discussions. Just now, Roger Wong, Wang Jifeng's father, they would agree. Because when we have a law, it takes 7-8 years to amend. It's cumbersome and takes a long time. So affecting the transgender people, the parents here have not reassigned their sex. They do not have transgender friends, but I have a few. Transgender sexual reassignment is not that simple. It's not just a surgical procedure. It's not, as a fear-monger, the Christian academic, if you like to marry the same sex, then you should castrate yourself, as that parent said just now. Is ignorant. Talking about love and religion. We have a lot of Christians here. They spread the most fear and hatred. A long time ago, they had discriminated blacks, and not too long ago, they discriminated women. And now, women and blacks cannot be discriminated against. They are now just discriminating the sexual minority. Next, we have Mr. Zhong Jiho. In 2014, MAB, from first reading to the hearing now, it's just ran a course of a few months, and you received more than 2,500 submissions. But what is surprising is that 90% of views in black and white say they are objecting same-sex marriage. Previously, I received a letter saying, I am a parent of 2 children. I am aware of the importance of heterosexual marriage. If the MAB is amended, the children cannot grow up happily. Well, the LegCo has received a lot of similar letters. And even if the amendment is endorsed, then the original one heterosexual family, they won't become different or choose to reassign a sex. W's legal counsel said that they were not fighting for same-sex marriage. They just wanted to clarify, under the basis of heterosexual marriage, the marriage, they just want to determine whether they can cover transgender people. So 90% of Christian families, they have come to the wrong place, have written the wrong letters. It's unfortunate that the Security Bureau have included 40A bracket 2, and they want to include SRS into the marriage bill. Hong Kong, as a signatory, is breaking the law, and they have not thought on behalf of the transgender. That they have not considered that in order to get married, they would undertake a high-risk surgery. Well, we have people who have undergone more than 10 surgeries and they cannot complete this assignment. Some people are too old to undergo surgery and they die under the knife. And amending the law takes 10 or 8 years. If the government does not wish to amend 40A2, it is equivalent to casting the transgender into a fiery pit. So only those who have completed SRRs can change their gender. Using administrative measures to determine their sex gender, it's better than relying on legislation. So, as the saying goes, the devil is in the details. If the government is not willing to amend 40A bracket 2 such that the marriage registrar can determine a applicant's gender, we would rather object to this until the government is willing to amend 40A bracket 2. Thank you, Mr. Chung. Next, Mr. Tommy Jai from Rainbow of Hong Kong. I feel it's necessary to discuss the constitutional responsibility. The Basic Law Article 39 says that Hong Kong is a signatory to human rights conventions and covenants. Hong Kong being a signatory, then the public should enjoy these rights. So what are we discussing here? The original marriage ordinance is being challenged, and so if the government, the proposed MAB contravenes the international covenant, we will take our case to the courts and we will win again. According to the International Convention, transgender and same-sex marriages are very clear. Under the UN rights, in the last few resolutions in 2011, there have been human rights reports. In paragraph 71, it says that transgender people in many jurisdictions cannot enter a marriage under the sex of their preference. So they encounter many difficulties in employment and so on. And changing the gender of their identity, they need to be sterilized or need to divorce. This is against the human rights of the UN. So in the Human Rights Committee, they urge the countries to recognize sexual gender and recognize transgender rights. If the transgender need to be sterilized before they can change the ID or get married, then that is against the human rights. It cannot stand the test of the law, and they will have to amend once again. On today's occasion, I've heard a lot of fear, and there is a lot of ignorance. So I hope the government does not use fear as a tool. In light of fear and concerns, there's a need to educate the people, including there's more than just male and female in nature. We have more than a few hundred babies where their sex cannot be determined under the hospital authority. In the Olympics or in games, it's important to determine whether a person is male or female, but in the International Olympic Committee, they have spent 30 years and cannot define under what circumstances a person is male or female. Do they use DNA, hormones? We can't. So you need to understand that in nature, sex is just a transition. Next we have Jimmy Sham. Why do we have the MAB? Is because of the appeal case, the winning of W's appeal case. So transgender cannot, it's unconstitutional for those who undergo SRS, and the government needs to amend the marriage ordinance. So time's almost up, and the government is proposing this bill, and Mr. York Chow says that this amendment is against human rights. It's against the Constitution. So it's like a primary school student. They are required to copy and as a teacher, do we accept this assignment, or we ask them to redo the assignment? So the DOJ is now set up a transgender work group to look at the transgender rights. And today, if we endorse this law, there are only two consequences. One, the interdepartmental working group will be more advanced, but the Security Bureau will need to amend the law again, or we seek a judicial review. And the government, if they are forced to amend another time, it's just a waste of taxpayers' money. So just amend it once. So why don't you do the job properly the first time? And also like to respond to deputations. That is, same-sex marriage and transgender are very different. For example, I am a homosexual. I will not change my gender just to get married, because if my appearance and do not match my ID, then housing, employment, and travel will be severely affected. And more importantly, my partner is also homosexual. If I wear women's clothing, my partner might not accept that. So if you have any logic, you will understand. And just now, a lot of people made wrong comments. You should not bear false witness. Same-sex marriage and this ordinance are not relevant. Don't combine them. And for transgenders, they do not have to undergo surgery to go to a female washroom. They just need a medical certificate, and they can enter the woman's washroom. As York Chow said, if I were to enter a female's washroom with a medical, and I have a medical cert, I won't display my sexual organs. That's very simple. So you should not use fear. You should not use fear-mongering as a tool. Transgender are actually under a lot of pain in their livelihood. Thank you, Mr. Sham. Next, we have Mimi Wong. I'm speaking on Association of World Citizens, Hong Kong, China. We feel that the government proposing the MAB, they should not do so. The ruling had already said that there's a 1-year stay before it will take effect. The transgender, they don't need this extraneous conditions in the ordinance. we should have the first transgender people speaking here. After the SRS, the legal status, we have no way of acknowledging our legal status. I'll give you an example. Under the Public Facility Ordinance 72B17, there's a regulation that any male cannot enter a female region, but for males under 5 years old who are accompanied by a female, they are not under this condition. So in other words, if our gender has not been recognized by law, so even if I have a sex reassignment surgery, after surgery, if I go to the female washroom, it's still a breach of the law. So that's one issue. The second issue, sexual offenses, Cap 200, Section 118 is related to rape. So after surgery, the so-called vagina, is that recognized legally? Is that acceptable vagina? If they are raped, can they be prosecuted? I don't know. So legally, we have no legal status. If you just change one legislation, it does not resolve transgender people's legal status, then you should repeal this amendment and the work should be handed over to the intra-department working group for them to study how to implement transgender gender recognition. So if we feel that the marriage bill needs to be amended, the only thing that needs to be amended is the heterosexual annulment.
Ms. Chimei Fong, I am a person was born in Hong Kong. I'm married with 2 children. I see many unreasonable things in our society, and I'm really worried and concerned. To break down the family system, the minority of people try to break down the family system and to break down our moral systems. I'm very angry. The government, without the need to enact legislation, allow transgenders who doesn't go through the SRS to get married. This is only a pretext for same-sex marriage. Last year, Mr. Chen Chi-chun talk about, confusing, same-sex marriage with transgender marriage. I have the following observations regarding the bill. I think marriage is an important part of public policy. We should extensively consult the public, and we should have a long period of discussion before we decide to make any changes. It is regrettable that the decisions of the judges have already put the administration into a passive position. And some members and the EOC chairman also try to defend those who advocate same-sex marriage, and this has created fear among the public. Marriage is not just something between 2 persons. It will also affect reproduction, social structure, moral standards, and so on. It will and it may even affect policies relating to public facilities. To add transgender persons into the matrimonial ordinance does not just require some textual amendments. The government is acting in haste. In Section 17 of the Constitution paper said that the proposal will have implications on human rights, the economy, and the environment. There are no impact. Since July last year, we're only talking about a few months' time. How can the government assess the impact in all those areas? I never realized that the government is so efficient. Fourthly, marriage is the foundation of the family, and the family is the place where children grow up. We need to cater to the interests of our next generation. Family consisting of transgender persons cannot reproduce, and they can only adopt children, and then the child may have no choice but to accept a transgender person as the parent. So are there any members in this council who would like to defend the human rights of children. I therefore think that there is no urgent need to amend the marriage ordinance in haste, because any such amendment will have grave impact on the monogamous system of marriage. It will also have impact on our culture, our moral systems, our education, and the long-term development of Hong Kong. Since not amending the ordinance will not affect Hong Kong, and if we amend the ordinance, there will be damages that we cannot really predict. I therefore propose that we should not amend the ordinance. Thank you, Ms. Chu. Next, we have Mr. Wong Chi-Chia. Regarding the ruling of the CFA, I agree with 3 of the points in the judgment. I support the CFA to deal with the question of same-sex marriage on the basis of the ruling on W. Supporting the amendment will not affect this existing system of monogamous marriage, and I think we should requiring the person to go through the SRS before they will be allowed to have marriage. I think monopoly is a system and the foundation of our prosperity. The family and our country will be affected. It will give rise to a lot of social problems. We cannot allow the minority views to override those of the majority interests. I therefore have many reservations about the proposal in the bill. The judges in the CFA did not have a unanimous view, and the CFA decided to suspend the enforcement of the ruling, which reflects the complexity of the issue. I think that the marriage among transsexuals will affect the interests of all people in our society. How do you clearly define the identity of transgender persons? And for the transgender persons, we have to redefine their family relationships. It's very complicated. If a person changes from a man to a woman, should the children address him as the father or mother? Are the children of a transgender person regarded as someone living in a single parent family because the father has not died, he's just changed his sexual gender? And also all the definitions about family relationship will be affected, and it will greatly affect our social stability. Changes in the law will create long-term controversy. Many people, myself included, do not understand these provisions very well. I can stop buying the Lehman Brothers bonds, but once this bill is enacted, then everybody has to follow. And if somebody change same-sex marriage and confuse it with transgender marriage among transgender marriage persons, and then the public cannot help but worry. And changing the person, a widower to a widowed person, is problematic because you are deleting terms which are familiar to the general public, and by amending these terms, it shows that the bill is not very clear. If we hastily, apply the Sexual Recognition Act from the UK, it will easily enable same-sex marriage. Let's forget that where Hong Kong is in part of China, where Hong Kong is a society based on Chinese values, you cannot change those traditional values. Hong Kong cannot accept these concepts, far-reaching concepts of same-sex marriage. I propose that we should not amend the current ordinance. Thank you. Next, Ms. Che Yok Ling. Thank you, Chairman. I represent a number of citizens to object the bill because it changes the definition of men and women. First of all, I accept the transgenders. We are against discrimination. I think we should all respect each other. But the proposal of the EOC is that we should allow the transgender persons to marry legally without going through the SRS. No matter how they justify this, we're talking about marriage between men and women. It's like a tantamount to legitimizing same-sex marriage. It's a drastic change, upsetting our traditional Chinese values, and I don't think this is acceptable. The EOC has repeatedly quoted examples from Europe and UK in particular, but there are many other international precedents whether they've considered that. In Singapore, for example, if the nationals want to change their gender and marry with somebody of an opposite sex, they have to go through the SRS, although some Western countries allow same-sex marriage. but more countries and jurisdictions do not do that. For example, in Macau, last year, there were proposals to recognize the rights of same-sex partners, but that was not carried. In Taiwan, 300,000 people took to the street to defend, marriage between men and women. In Singapore, homosexual behavior is still criminal. In Hong Kong, community comprises mainly of Chinese people. We attach values to traditional Chinese family values. Why do we enact legislation by making reference to Western values? Foreign experience have told us that same-sex marriage have adverse consequences. In some countries, they allow schools to teach and even advocate homosexualism. Those who advocate monogamous marriage. Some who oppose same-sex marriage are being prosecuted. Same-sex marriage is being actually encouraged and even commended. And for young people who don't have any sexual orientation, because they are being educated, they're encouraged, they will attempt to try homosexual behavior. In Taiwan, after it passed a law, the schools started to teach children that homosexualism is normal, and 10-year hence AIDS has become one of the 10 major causes of death for young people. The marriage system reflects our social values. The EOC ignores public opinion, and there is no social consensus. The fact that so many people have come here today to object the bill show that. Why is it that just because some minority is being proposal, we are now making the amendment that is against family values? I'd like to urge electrical members to consider the interests of our next generation. Please do not pass this bill, and also do not agree that we should do away with the SRS requirement. Next, Mr. Punagang. Yes, I represent the EOC. First of all, I'd like to talk about the rationale behind the CFA ruling. That is, the rights of a transgender person could be recognized. He can marriage based on his, reassigned sex identity. I think the focus of the CFA is about the rights of the transgender person. We're not talking about same-sex marriage. W, in the case concerned, has completed its SRS procedure. The CFA is aware that there are many transgender persons, people, it's not suitable for them to go through the SRS operations. The question is, how do you recognize the so-called the sex status of the person who's gone through the SRS? For persons who have completed the operation, if they can marry, then I think there's no need for this bill. Even if we don't have this bill, when the ruling becomes effect, you already have that legal consequence. The attitude of the court as to how we recognize the gender status of the transgender person, the court has an open mind. The decision to suspend the enforcement of the ruling was based on the hope that the government will consider enacting a holistic sex recognition act in order to recognize the reassigned gender status of the person, and also to consider the rights of the persons who have gone through this SRS. One person talked about the right of inheritance, the right to use public toilets, and the right not to be sexually violated, and so on. All these are issues which need to be considered. The SFA has also mentioned in its ruling that other than a holistic or comprehensive sex recognition act, we should also consider enacting a discrimination law to ensure that the transgender person will not be discriminated against. The current bill has not satisfied the expectations of the CFA. It has not dealt with the other series of issues, so it's not complete as a piece of legislation. More importantly, I think they regard they would require the person to have go through the SRS before they will be allowed to engage in same-sex marriage, and that is not complying with the UN Human Rights Commission's standard. And so this requirement is not compatible with human rights standards. The bill has put this as a prerequisite in the law. As one earlier speaker have said, this will only be subject to further challenge in court. If I may, I'm sorry, your time is up. Next, Ms. Gloria Mock, Chairman. As a service organization, after we've heard the ruling of CFA, we were shocked. We don't understand why the judges could come to a decision and everybody in Hong Kong were to follow, and we have no say, because if we amend the ordinance, it will it will result in many changes. The CFA did not represent public opinion in making that decision. They have not consulted the public, and the ruling should be, made by LegCo after they've gone through extensive consultation. The Hong Kong administration seems to be led by the nose by the judges in the CFA, and we have to follow whatever is ruling. The matrimony ordinance has been in force for so many years. The CFA's ruling, after CFA's ruling, the EOC and Mr. Chen Chi-kun now say that people can change the gender without having to go through the SLS. As parents, we are really very angry, and we feel aggrieved because this will upset the entire traditional family matrimonial system. There's no bottom line when we talk about international human rights. So this proposal will create a lot of social confusion. We are a service organization. We don't serve the community. We don't really want to be so vocal. But in this case, we cannot help but come forward because of the consequences. I think we should bear in mind the future of Hong Kong. We should not try to, create more chaos. To enact this legislation will create further chaos. I hope the administration will consider this carefully. In many countries in Europe, they have same-sex marriage among transgender persons. Shouldn't the government take time to study the possible impact of allowing that? If we're going to change the law, this will be irreversible. Have we considered the damages that will be caused and the price we have to pay? Should we enact or amend the legislation before we've considered all the possible consequences? Just because a few judges say that we need to change the law, we have to do it. So we feel very, very frustrated. I don't think the government should act in haste. They should spend more time, take 10, 20 years to observe what happens to countries which have amended the ordinance to allow same-sex marriage. What is the impact on the development of young people, to the family, to the economy, and the whole society? We don't need to decide in haste. Just like many years ago, soccer gambling was not legal, but now after it's being legalized, the government is spending so much money to help young people who are addicted to gambling. And these young people who are addicted to gambling have already lost their future. People want to change the gender. I think they need, psychological treatment rather than going through a surgery. So I think we should step back. We should not amend the legislation in haste. Well, just now you refer to the chairman of the UC, and that should be Dr. Yok Chow and not Mr. Chen Chi-kun. Next, Ms. Yu Mui Ling. Our organization against the proposed amendment to the ordinance. We believe that the marriage ordinance, the amendment to the ordinance will have far-reaching consequences. As a society based on the rule of law, while we respect the decision of CFA, we should also allow the public to participate in the discussion on this subject. Honourable members, you represent the public. For this subject, which has far-reaching consequences, I urge all of you to really conduct extensive consultation among the civil society. We should have more discussion before we are able to understand the public opinion and then have further discussion in the course of legislation. We have in the division of power between the three, between the executive, administration, and judiciary. So I think the government should conduct extensive consultation, as in the case of the development of North East NT. This amendment will have great impact on the family system, and so I think we should have more discussion in public space so that the public will have the right to know and understand. I hope all members can put a hold on this proposed amendment I'm a teacher myself. When I share with my teachers about the rule of law in Hong Kong, I always believe that in Hong Kong we have balance of power, and LegCo can at the appropriate time fight for the interests of the public, and I'm proud of that. I don't want our students to ask me in future why LegCo members sometimes also have not asked the government to listen more to public opinion and to conduct more public consultation. Why is that on the subject of amending the marriage ordinance, the government is not doing that? So I'd like to urge members to put a hold on the proposed amendment and to veto the proposed amendments. As the Honourable Chen Xiu-hoi said, that social policies are not decided by judges or the court, and there is no sufficient evidence to prove that the community widely accepts same-sex marriage. And because of that, the court should not exercise its constitutional power to effect this change. The marriage between same-sex marriage is not just interpreted by the court. I think we should have extensive public consultation, and that decision should be made by the legislature. At the present moment, I'd like to urge members to go back to the public space and to discuss and to respond to this to views related to issues before you go through. You have further discussion in this council. So on behalf of my organization, I object to the proposed amendments to the marriage ordinance. Mr. Cheung Hong Sing, Chairman, I object to any proposed amendments to the current marriage ordinance. I was born in Hong Kong and grew up in Hong Kong. I grew up, I was educated in Hong Kong from kindergarten to university. I'm now a pilot. I've worked for more than 20 years. Hong Kong has given me a lot. I love this place. I love Hong Kong. I hope Hong Kong can continue to develop in a healthy manner and our next generation can live in harmony. So I've come forward today to say to members and the other deputations, as to how much we urge to defend the traditional family system. I am the parent of 3 children. My wife and I also believe that teaching our children how to become parents themselves are very important. To allow the next generation to live under such a tradition is the most healthy way. Amending the marriage ordinance will challenge the existing monogamy system of marriage. I say it again, if the proposed amendment were approved, you will be challenging the traditional concept of monogamous marriage between a man and a woman. There are many issues here. After a man and woman marries, and if one party want to go through a sexual reassignment, does the original marriage will the existing marriage void? If we have children, are we going to force the children to live under 2 fathers or 2 mothers? And if they want, the couple wants to adopt children, would that be appropriate? There are many issues which I wonder whether the government has already looked into that and whether we have a consensus already. Some people even propose that persons who have not yet gone through the SRS, so long as they can prove that the gender status is confirmed, they can marry, and this is even more confusing. So, because both the father and the mother could become pregnant. So just because of one case law, we should not change the entire the traditional family system, which may affect millions of families. Before any extensive consultation, the government should not enact the legislation in haste.
We should not blindly follow the values of overseas jurisdictions. Because of my profession, I've been able to go to different countries and come into contact with different people. So does that mean that Western culture will definitely be more advanced and better? So I suggest that we should pause and think, and we should think for our future generations. We shouldn't just ignore our future generations. We should also think for their well-being, and we should also build up this concept of a family. We should not be going against that. Thank you. Next, Ms. Miranda Tin Tank. Thank you, Chairman, and good morning. I'm the Chairman of Care for the Well-being of Children, and our institutions' stance is that we should not change the law to allow same-sex marriage, because this would directly or indirectly go against the existing institution of marriage, because this is the core value of our community, and that would also have far-reaching implications. We should allow the civil society to discuss this and decide. We should not just allow a few judges to change the institution of marriage and also the whole social institution, because care for the well-being of children would like to safeguard our children so that we can uphold this value of the community, that is this monogamy. And also for us parents, we believe that our community and our families have a lot to lose if that is allowed to go through, and that would only cause more confusion in the community. And as a mother, Hong Kong's education system, which is subject to changes time and again, has already caused a lot of confusion to us. And if even the marriage institution is going to be changed, then we will have a lot of difficulty in educating our future generations. So where should our moral values stand? And how would we be treated, not as narrow-minded and so on? Well, this morning I went to the female toilet. All right, still we can see the logo, which is someone wearing a dress. And then for the gentleman's toilet, there is also a man. And if we are not able to distinguish between a male and a female, and also the genital or the gender features can be blurred, and if you can just use drugs and also others to change your gender, then the gender identity would cause a lot of confusion to our future generation. I don't know how other mothers think, but then as a mom who's pregnant for 10 months before I gave birth to my children, I hope that I can give my children a whole life of love. But then if they want to change the gender, and if they want to give up on their anatomic gender, I would be heartbroken, and I would really feel sorry about that, and I would then have to reflect on myself whether or not I've done anything wrong. So how about those around you, and have you ever thought about the hurt they would feel? And also Hong Kong, humans are humans, and we should not just say that because of accommodation, inclusiveness, and so on and so on, and so on and so forth. These are very precious values, but then we should not be abusing them, and we should not just destroy our morals because these virtues are already being dampened in a community. So do you want them to go further down? And I don't want to see people who are very liberal-minded who think that they can just have different relationships even with bees and so on. I don't want that to happen. Next, Ms. Kathy Ho. Good morning. I'm a primary school teacher. First of all, on the PORO. First of all, we also have to look at the UN Convention on Children's Rights. Yes, children might not be able to express themselves very clearly, but then they also have the right to be protected. And earlier on, we saw two Hong Kong women, and they caused a lot of confusion in Taiwan when they rented a flat, and that's because of their family problems, and that could also have some impact on them. And earlier on, a male student in a class asked me, teacher, do you have a penis? And I did not respond to that, but then sometimes he would also hug me and call me mom. I believe that that's because of his complicated family background. When I tried to provide counseling to him, I found out that he might have had behavioral problems because of his family problems. Now, coming back to this institution of marriage, we might have this blind spot thinking that, does W have to get married? In fact, with freedom on marriage, he or she can also choose not to get married. Well, yes, some people say that SRS are not human or are not humane. Yes, from time to time there might be people who are suitable for going through this SRS, but then of course there are also other complications, and it's not an easy problem. But then have you considered, do they have alternatives? Do they have other options? Recently we had this Korean drama, and which has been a great hit in Asia, and I think for psychological problems, we can always treat them psychologically. And here we have many institutions and religious bodies and welfare agencies, and I'm sure they would be able to come up with ways to help these people solve their problems. And some people have been talking about overseas case laws and experience and so on. I do have a lot of doubts. Well, as Chinese people, why can't we just respect our Chinese tradition? Nobody has ever mentioned that we should also respect the tradition in Southeast Asia in particular. How about our motherland? And why can't we just respect our local culture? All right, the ancestral writing, Li Ji, or the book on rituals has already taught us that we should respect these core values, and Mrs. Carrie Lam also said that for those in power, we should also insist on what is right. And from what I've seen is that for many frontline teachers, they are already working very hard and they are already very frustrated. Many of them actually suffer from depression, and some people say that if you're over anxious, well, when you go to the toilets, well, this might be a rare occasion, but then there are problems in the classroom day in, day out. All right, thank you, Ms. Ho. Next, Ms. Kitty Zhang. Good morning, everyone. I'm a member of the public. I'm a mother. I do not agree that we should change the law so that we can legitimize transsexuals' marriage, because that would give rise to serious social problems. In other words, we are actually allowing same-sex marriage de facto, because people might not like their gender at birth, but then if they can just be confirmed to have some psychological problems, and if they can get married with a person from the same gender, then that could amount to same-sex marriage, and that could give rise to a lot of problems, and that could also cause a lot of sex abuse and so on. So, for example, for somebody who is born a man and after he has undergone psychological assessment, if he feels like a female, then if he just goes into a female toilet and if he exposes his body, then how about the other women around? They would be shocked, and they would also be that would also cause a lot of psychological trauma. And how can I be sure that my daughter would not be subject to that? So how can you allow someone to expose his body or his genital organs in a public place, and if he or she goes into the toilet of another sex to take a shower, then if she is still a female in terms of his biological features, then that could also cause confusion to the other men around, and I don't want that to happen. In particular, for adolescents who are still at a developmental age, then that could also cause a lot of impact on them. So as parents, how can we not be worried? And also that would also allow the gender recognition amongst the youngsters, and after the law is enacted, that could also become a more serious problem, and the younger generation would think that changing sex is just a casual matter, in particular because of some trauma in young age, or because of some parents' problems. They would think that they should change into another sex, and if they just change gender casually, that would also cause a lot of trauma to their parents. That's why we believe that we should put in more resources to help these people who have gender recognition disorder so that they can receive more treatment, instead of allowing them to get married, because this is not going to solve the root of the problem. And as a mother, I was pregnant for 10 months, and I had to be very careful before I could give birth to a healthy baby. And children, you're born because of your parents, and if you just change your gender casually, and if you have to go through such surgery, then your parents will be hurt, and I would really feel really heartbroken if that's the case, because you have to protect your body, because that's filial piety, because your parents want you to grow up healthily, and if you just go through such surgery, you won't be happy just because of that, and your parents will be prepared to go through all those difficulties with you. Please do not hurt yourselves. Thank you, Ms. Zhang. The last person to speak is Mr. Low from the Human Rights Monitor. I'd like to remind members who are speaking the reason why we have to change the law. Now, that's because of a very clear ruling from the court. That's the protection offered or afforded by our Constitution has been abused. That's why the administration lost the case, and as a result, we have to move these amendments. And if today's amendment repeats history again, then we will only see this repeated time and again, and then once again, the judiciary will be overturning such provisions. And I'm sure the Security Bureau, in terms of torture claims, has got this very clear impression. That is, if we were to go through this reform, we will have to do it comprehensively. The reason why the CFA has given us this 1-year grace period, that's because it wants the administration to come up with a very clear and thorough reforms. Yes, we do have traditional core values, but that we can't go so far as to undermining the personal value and personal rights. And if such values were to undermine an individual's right, then that would not be acceptable under the Human Rights Convention. And clearly, on this occasion, the administration has been asked to change the law, and what is required under the proposed legislation is for somebody who has gone through a full SRS before he will be allowed to live in his acquired gender, and then he'll be able to enjoy the rights under that new acquired gender. The requirement for the person to go through this full SRS under the international human rights regime, that's a clear violation of human rights. And one of the reports is that last year the UN the special rapporteur, on torture and other cruel and inhuman or degrading treatment or punishment, says that if such a surgery would mean that the person will have to go through such irreversible procedure. And there are also cases or case laws in Germany and other jurisdictions pointing out very clearly that well, a person should have autonomy on his body, and he should not be subject to unnecessary limitations on gender recognition, and those would not be acceptable. And as we can see, the requirements will also infringe upon other rights to health, and also the right not to be subject to forced treatment and so on, and that would also amount to discrimination, and also that would also infringe upon the person's right to privacy and so on. All right, thank you. All the individuals and deputations have, for this session, have spoken. Next, well, this session should end by 11:20, so we still have some time to go before the end of this first session. So I'd like to know if members have any questions which they would like to put to the deputations. We have Raymond Chan and Priscilla Leung. Paul Chair. Sid Ho. Who else? All right. I'll read out the names: Raymond Chan, Priscilla Leung, Fernando Cheung, Paul Chair, Sid Ho, and Helena Wong. So I'll have to draw a line here. So 6 members, 2 minutes each. 2 minutes each. Because we have some 40+ deputations who would like to speak to us. Yes, Raymond Chan. Thank you, Chairman. From the very beginning, I've been saying that the administration's approach to amend the marriage ordinance to resolve the problem of gender definition and also gender recognition, I think is just a wrong approach. You can see the complexity and also the community's views. All right, our deputations, we support consultation. We support that there should be an extensive consultation. We don't want to rush this law by drawing by coming up with a deadline. In fact, there is consultation this week, and there will be another session next week, so as to allow us to express our views. I understand that there are many people who are against this, and they have different justifications. Some are against the ruling by the CFA, and some are against the wording of the amendment bill, and some are against same-sex marriage, and some are against allowing people to change their gender. Unfortunately, we don't have any representative from the DFJ here, so if you have time, I'd like the administration to respond to this. So what are the legal justifications for people to change sex? So do we know if there is any legal basis for that? And through today's exchange, I understand that there are diversified opinion, but then you have been rather unanimous in this sense. I'd like to conduct this questionnaire. All right, if the SARG is not to change the law, and if this marriage amendment bill is to be presented to this council without any change in the wording, so how many of you will be supporting it? How many of you will be against it? All right, as you can see here, Bureau Director or Undersecretary, you will have to consider very positively about doing this again. Yes, despite the diversified views expressed here, and if you do not change anything, and if you just try to bulldoze it through this council, then for those who are on the conservative side, or those who are in support of equality in rights, then that would not be acceptable. Next, Priscilla Leung. Thank you, Chairman. Last year when we debated on the issue, I already said that without changing the law, actually, for the binding part by common law, it will already come into effect, and therefore for those who are in support of this, that would already come into effect, and for those who are in support of that, what they said that is not acceptable. In fact, Raymond Chan is already beginning to agree with what I said in terms of the requirement of the law. But then, does it mean that we will have to do it within a year? I've already foretold that how can we reach a consensus within a year if you want to resolve all the problems? Well, it's very difficult. Even if we try to do it in 100 years, that would not be possible, because the institution of marriage will have to consider other people, including our children. Well, we may not be able to take into account all the relationships. For example, for love amongst gay people and so on, all right, it's not against the law. But then if you marry without, if you marry without first getting a divorce, then or if a married person tries to get married with another person, then it would be against the law. And of course, you might want to undermine the entire institution of marriage so that there will no longer be monogamy. I'd like to put this to the EOC, Mr. Poon. All right, it says that well, under 18.4, well, we will have to guarantee that our children will be able to accept religious beliefs and so on. And basic law also says that Hong Kong people have the right to religious beliefs. And but then there is a couple who express their views on same-sex or transsexual marriage, and they have been denied the right to adopt children. Would you also regard that as affirmative or negative discrimination? So has that been discussed by Yok Chow and your members? So does that mean that Yok Chow represents all the members of the EOC? All right, you have sought clarification on this, but then for the complicated issues, those cannot be addressed. Fernando Jiang, I understand that the issue under discussion is a very controversial one, and the views expressed are very clear. But then for the experiment conducted by Raymond Chan has shown us that, well, for the amendment bill presented to us by the administration today, once again, for those who are in support and for those who are against it, they both find that unacceptable. So it's a matter for the administration to reflect on. How come this is such a highly controversial issue, and to such an extent that both camps are against it? Yes, they might have done so for different reasons. But then, on this issue, number one, we have to respect the ruling by the court. We have to continue with the legislation in order to amend the law to comply with the court ruling. And next, we also have to look at international conventions. We have to observe them. I'd like to put this to Mr. Loh Yok Kai, Human Rights Monitor. Well, from the human rights angle, and also the fact that we have to comply with some international conventions. So what is your suggestion? So what's the direction to take in terms of amending the law?
Hey, Mr. Law, well, I think a comprehensive dealing of rights such as marriage rights, we need a comprehensive arrangement. For example, if they are employed, then if their gender is reassigned, it would affect their contracts, their benefits, their labor rights. Well, a lot of issues need to be dealt with. So, overseas experience, the CFA says that they have to consider compelling reasons. For example, in the UK Recognition Act, the UK Gender Recognition Act, Hong Kong can legislate. Hong Kong, Mr. Pt1, I have a lot of views, but we're here to listen, and I've heard that two people cannot speak. Miss Miranda Tin, I'd like to hand over my time for them to conclude. Miss Miranda Tin. Well, actually, I'd like to say we cannot. Some people say that we are we're not in line with the mainstream. Allow us to be conservative. Allow us to disagree. Allow us to parent our children and teach our children. And lastly, I'd like to ask Mr. Leung Bingman, in his letter to the government on 5th of March, I hope that the government do not rush through legislation. They should consider that the marriage institution should be considered comprehensively. And I hope that the Hong Kong media can have an open, liberal attitude and should not be biased to one side. Next, Mr. Poon. So before we have a comprehensive legislation, we don't want to have conditions in the law that sexual reassignment surgery should be completed before an assigned gender can be recognized. We now need to rely on administrative measures, and before we have full legislation in the transition period, we should retain administrative measures. And even this administrative measure, Ms. Sid Ho, thank you for hearing your views. I feel that there's a lot of pressure in Hong Kong society. I've heard parents' concerns, people with different sexual inclination. There's so much fear. We see the knowledge of sexual minorities is severely insufficient, especially there is no recognition for people with a different sexual inclination. There's significant ignorance. So this fear you project your fears and concerns on sexual minorities. So I'd like to urge you to return to a tradition that is respect other people regardless of whether they are male or female, because acceptance is most important. Chairman, I want to ask the parents in attendance, through what channels do they receive information? Because as a legislature, we have a responsibility to help you receive information, because from understanding we can eliminate fear. The government also has this responsibility. You've been given a year and you have come up with the worst sort of legislation that is not accepted by both sides. So shouldn't you go back and tell the whole government that the Civil Affairs Bureau should handle the work rather than the Security Bureau? Ms. Helena Wong, I've heard a lot of parents concerned, and as a parent, if you love your children, you need to understand your offspring. You need to accept them rather than forcing them to accept your path. that is a challenge for parents and teachers. So today, the topic we're talking about, we're not talking about same-sex marriage. We're talking about transgender. The majority of us are not transgender. Only a small amount of people are transgender. They have difficulty accepting their sex at birth, and after the struggles, after sex reassignment surgery, we're talking about these people when they get married. They are married under the gender that they have acquired. It is still a heterosexual marriage. It is not same-sex marriage, unless you say that these people should not get married under any circumstances, before SRS and even after SRS. Even if they have become female after SRS, they cannot get married with a male. If that is the case, then it's against a breach of human rights. So you should not mix this with same-sex marriage. Next, Ms. Regina Yip and Mr. Leung Kok Hong wish to speak, but we should have invited the next delegation. So we'll give you a minute each. So the deputations can. Emily Lau. Oh, thank you for attending. I've heard the criticisms against EOC. That is problematic. The establishing of EOC was to protect disadvantaged groups. They have legislation empowering them. If they don't do it, they are not doing their job. This afternoon they will attend the Constitutional Affairs panel. Hong Kong is a signatory to a lot of conventions. Next month you have to attend the UN. I hope the EOC has someone attending. So I hope the EOC take more time, meet with more people, explain to them that Hong Kong's responsibilities under the Human Rights Convention. Regina Yip, thank you for attending. I just want to say that this bill is very simple, it's very technical. The principle is in the interpretation, that is, those who have completed SRS are viewed as having a new gender and they can get married. And those who object to a same-sex marriage, or those who object to your objection, is not relevant to this bill. This is not proposing same-sex marriage or having just a mental attitude. For those who feel that this bill is too narrow, the Security Bureau is not empowered to handle that as well. So thank you for providing views. We understand different views, but a lot of what you said is irrelevant. Thank you, Mrs. Yip. The three judges can't change Hong Kong laws. You are unduly concerned. I am aware you are concerned, but this bill is not talking about it. And if I have an opportunity, if we have legislation of same-sex marriage, then we can discuss it. Just now you were rambling. If defending marriage is so important, then you shouldn't allow people to divorce. Like in Italy or Ireland, they can't divorce. You are destroying the family. And you don't have to worry. The government is not doing a proper job. They're just having something worse than before. It should be okay, but now they have to complete the SRS before they can get married. The judges didn't ask them to do it, so. Well, this session ends here. I have to thank everybody for attending and expressing your views, such that our bill committee members can be aware of your views. Thank you for attending. We'll break for 5 minutes and resume at 10:35.